So all the sessions later about bale grazing, so winter management, and also arable rotation, arable integration rely entirely on the ability to graze in a rotation, to manage our grazing and to think about how we can use the control of our grazing to keep grass growing and to produce more grass and manage where. Sorry, I got muted. Oh, okay. Hopefully you can hear me. So I want to talk about graze and rest systems today. And there's lots of different words that are used for graze and rest systems, like rotational grazing, mob grazing, AMP, management intensive, lots of different ways of saying these things. So you can look them up on Google to find all different types of grazing management, but essentially they all have key principles of creating grazing periods followed by rest periods, with time being the main aspect that we need to think about. So it doesn't matter how many animals we've got in the system. We can do it with 2 animals, we can do it with 2,000 animals, and everything in between. We can apply these principles of grazing and resting as long as we think about how much time the animals are grazing for and how much time we then are giving as a rest and recovery period for our grass afterwards. So I'm going to focus mostly on mob or rotational grazing, which is kind of what both Jock and I have been doing variations of over the last few years. But essentially it's short duration, high density grazing, followed by a long period of rest. And an example might be 24 hours of grazing with 100 cows per acre and 90 days rest. And that's not a fixed number. It could be less, more, but it's just to show that it's a short period of time, lots of animals on a relatively small area of ground. And we do that by splitting up our fields. So very traditional grazing management, particularly I would say here in the UK, would be set stocking or continuous variable, where you're just putting animals in fields and you're just kind of leaving them alone. There's not much infrastructure. You can have fixed water troughs and there's not much labor input. And then we can go into what is a more relaxed rotational approach, where we put all of our animals in just maybe 2 or 3 fields, and every few weeks we swap them between fields. So we're kind of moving from individual fields, but creating a bit of rest in our system. And then something that we see a lot here, particularly in dairy herds, but also during winter time, would be strip grazing, where we move the front fence, but the animals can still go back to water. And that can be quite useful because it means that animals don't need water being moved with them. But if you're doing that in the growing season, there's a real risk of overgrazing and affecting the plants as they are recovering. And so what we tend to want to move towards are these different grazing systems that allow for movement of animals in a much more controlled and sort of intensive way, where we either manage around our fixed water points, so hub and spoke or paddock, where we're moving animals around water, or with mob grazing systems where maybe we're moving the water with them, and then more intensively in a cell grazing system. And there's some really nice research that's come out recently about how cell grazing increases the grassland productivity by double, so you can grow twice as much grass. And so therefore increases the carrying capacity of the land, so we can have more animals, which ultimately means in a low input system, we can have better profit margins. And the reason why this kind of short grazing, intensive grazing periods are important with these longer rest and recovery is to reduce the risk of overgrazing. And sometimes people think that overgrazing is where the grass is very short. But actually overgrazing really means grazing a plant before it has fully recovered. So if we have a long, tall grass plant and in one hit, the animals come and eat it very quickly and it's eaten right down, that's not really overgrazing. It's when the animals are allowed to keep coming back to that plant every time it tries to grow that we have a problem. And what happens is that if the plant is trying to recover, but it keeps getting eaten, then essentially the roots start to die off to give the plant the energy it needs. And if we lose root mass, we lose the opportunity for healthy soils, which means that we're not going to have air and water infiltrating. We're not going to have healthy worms, beetles, etc., living in the soil. So the more rest and root mass we can maintain in the soil profile, the healthier our soils, the more resilient we can be in the face of climate change. So I want to give a quick worked example of the power of rest. So let's say I have a field and I've got 10 cows. And I've worked out that I can put my 10 cows in this field for 48 days. So I can just put them in there, shut the gate, and that's them for 48 days. The alternative thing I can do, and at the end of that 48 days, I would have to take them somewhere else. So they're in the field for 48 days, and then I have to take them away. However, if I split my field in half, I can have my cows on one side for 24 days, and then I can put them in to the other side for 24 days. And what that means is that I get 24 days rest ahead of the animals and then also behind the animals, so that once they finish their 24 days, I could put them back to where they started. And I can create this ongoing kind of intensity of grazing to create more rest in the system. So in this instance, I could have my 10 cattle for 12 days per paddock, creating more rest, so that by the time they've got to the third paddock, they've got lots of grass ahead of them, and then they've got lots of grass behind them. And I could keep going with 6 days per paddock, 3 days per paddock, 1 day per paddock. So you can see that the power of rest means that by just splitting these fields up and having more frequent moves and preventing those animals from going back to where they've already grazed, I'm able to create the conditions for that grass to regrow. And that means that at the end of my 48 days, I can just go back to the start. So I've essentially doubled the capacity of my field. So remember, the first time round, after 48 days, I had to take them all away. Now I can just go back to the beginning of the field. So I've increased the amount of grass that I'm growing on my farm, which means that I can do that in a way that is much more profitable. And it's almost like buying more land or renting more land without the need to actually go and buy it or rent it. So there are things that we need to plan for, like our water equipment, our fencing costs, the amount of time that we're going to be grazing, the size of the paddock, how long we're going to leave for recovery, and also how much forage, how much grass our animals need to eat, and how much we can give them, how much we'll have available for them. And Jock's going to talk more about that and give you some examples. So I'm going to hand over to Jock in a second, but I just quickly want to show some examples of what grassland would look like for us. So this is some of our cattle, and this was taken in May earlier this year. So you can see the grass is getting quite tall. Some of it has gone to seed already, and that isn't something we worry about. And then, so this is a paddock they've gone into. This is when we're calving. So we give them bigger paddocks when they're calving, so they've got a bit more space. And this is what we're leaving behind. So they go into this, they come out with this much left behind in our system. And this means that there's plenty of leaf left, which can act as a solar panel to help regrow, which means that we can come back to it quite quickly. And it also means that we can use the cattle to change some of the different plants that are growing. So on the left, we have dock leaves. I don't know how present they are in Estonia, but here they are something that people worry about as a weed. But this is a field before the cattle go in, and then 24 hours later, you can see they've completely eaten all of those plants. And what we want to do is make sure that our dung, so the cow pats in the middle photo, that's what we want them to look like. Nice and round, slightly layered with that slick in the middle. And that tells us that the animals are getting exactly the right mix of grass, ages, that fiber, that protein that they need in order to be healthy. So when we're moving animals using our electric fence, like in the picture on the left, it means that we can check to make sure that they're getting everything that they need by looking at their dung and making sure that that looks nice and healthy. So I'm going to hand over to Jock, who's going to talk in more detail. I'm going to control his PowerPoint. So let me just stop sharing this one.
My name's Jock Gibson, and I farm up in the Highlands of Scotland here. And I'm going to just give you a bit of background about ourselves, because I think it's important to do that so that it gives a bit more understanding as to how our grazing has changed over the last 10 years. By nature, I'm not a farmer. I'm an engineer, but not a very good one. So have came back to the family farm about 9 years ago now. We also have a butcher's shop as well. So all the beef that we produce here goes through our butcher's shop. And again, that's an important aspect of why we do what we do. Very much family farm. My wife and I run it, and we have 3 kids as well who have varying levels of interest. So our butcher shop, we're mostly food service, so supplying hotels and restaurants, but we also have a retail outlet, and we have a mail order service, so we're sending meat throughout the UK, and we cut and pack for other people. The common denominator is everybody that buys from us is looking for a very high quality, consistent product. So on our farm, we are about 250 head of cattle, with a mixture of Highland and Shorthorn genetics. So the Highland is very important to us. When my father bought the farm 50 odd years ago, he started off selling pedigree Highland cattle throughout the world, and a lot into Eastern Europe, but also into Australia, New Zealand, and North America and Canada. We have a 40-hectare farm that we own here. We have just signed a tenancy on a 20-hectare farm, which is a 10-year rented agreement. And then we also have temporary agreements for about 65 hectares of summer grazing. As said, we're originally pedigree Highlanders. We have had Aberdeen Angus through the system, but we are breeding those genetics out because they don't quite fit what we do. And really now the mainstay of what we do is with Shorthorns. But outdoor wintering is very important to us, so we need the hardiness of the Highlanders in this part of the world, and the Shorthorn provides a bit more bulk and speed of finishing. At the moment, we're about 90 cows and breeding heifers to 3 bulls. Everything we do here now is 100% grass and forage fed, and actually we don't grow any forage anymore. It's all just done off grass and silage. We are Scotch assured and pasture for life assured as well. We'll go to the next one. Perfectly. So on our beef supply, we are killing at between 520 kilos to 600 kilos live weight for a dead weight of 250 to 320 kilos. So quite small cattle. And again, that suits us. We don't get a huge amount of rain here, but we get about just under 1 meter a year. So it can get pretty soggy, and those lighter cattle stand up in the wet a bit better. For what it's worth, our kill out grades are R4Ls to O3s, O+3s. And that gives us in the butcher's shop a nice sirloin steak that we can cut at 225 grams at 1 inch thick or 25 millimeters thick. And we're killing from between 18 to 36 months, 18 for the pure Shorthorns and 36 months for the Highlanders. Okay, we have 5 main farm objectives. Each cow is to wean 1 calf per year, trouble-free. We need to keep our young stock growing at all times. That's really important for our point of view, from an eating quality point of view. We're providing year-round butchery, and we need to maintain our grass and forage system. But most importantly, we need to be profitable and we need to have fun doing it. So where we started off 10 years ago, when we inherited the farm, everything was set stocked. We didn't have any rest, and we were using a moderate amount of fertilizer. And these pictures don't show it very well because at the time we weren't really interested in how we were managing our grass. We were more interested in the livestock that were on it. But you can see there that we're very short covers. And in that picture, particularly in the bottom right, grass is very overgrazed, very tired, and looking at quite a lot of pugging or poaching around key areas. We felt that this wasn't doing any favors to the resilience of our farm, and so we were looking for another way. It was a very stressful way of managing our grass because we were then very dependent on rainfall, particularly as to how grass would grow. We would dry out quite easily, and livestock were reliant on quite a lot of inputs in order to thrive and grow on. Fields at that time were really only rested during the winter, and I would argue that winter rest isn't really rest. So if we look at what our grass growth looked like, this is typically our grass growth profile during the course of the year, and we're measuring our grass growth every week. And that black horizontal line was our grass demand. So that was how much demand we would have on the system at any one time, roughly, throughout the course of the year. Now, it's illustrative. It would, of course, fluctuate, but it just gives you a bit of an idea. All that grass in the red box is essentially surplus and what we would normally use to cut silage off for winter feeding. It generally wasn't enough, and so we would also be supplementing with bought-in feed. But that red box essentially represents 2 cuts of silage, which we would use to fulfill the lean months at the start and the end of each year. Okay, Nikki. In 2018, we introduced a paddock grazing system, and we started it off very simply. We basically split a 6-hectare field into 6 paddocks. The perimeter of the field already had electric in it, so we were just using polywire on reels to split it up. We were using mobile troughs during that first year, but I have to say we didn't get on very well with it. We found that cattle would break the troughs quite quickly, so we looked at a different way. But by and large, it was a very simple system. We were working off a 21-day rotation. So it's quite a quick rotation, but given where we were coming from, the increase in rest allowed us to grow a lot more grass and have a lot more cover. 2018 for us was a very dry year, and we were watching our neighbours and even our own ground, which wasn't under rotation, drying out and grass growth stopping. Where we had the rotation, we were always able to keep cattle and keep grass in front of our cattle, so that they always had good quality feed in front of them, and were maintaining good live weights, gains of over 1 kilo a day. What we've tried to do is gradually develop our grazing system. So at that point, we were measuring really hard. Entry covers and residuals were really important because we were trying to manage the grass for maximum growth and utilization. But that's sometimes, there's always a balance. You maximize for growth and utilization, something else suffers. What I would say is that we measured a lot, and that has helped us in our decision making going forward. And actually it helps at the time because you can see what's ahead of you and you can adjust accordingly. So this is how we have set up our 40-hectare block now. In the top left of that map, the top 6 paddocks is our original 6-hectare block. And as the years have gone by, we have worked through the farm, reseeding, but also putting an infrastructure behind. And there is an argument that we might subdivide some of these paddocks a bit more. But at the moment, we're about 30 hectares over 30 paddocks over 40 hectares. Everything is split with just one single line polywire, which goes up at the start of the grazing season about March. And we keep it up there. They're still up just now at the beginning of November, and they'll come down over the next month or so, just to save the equipment during winter and snow. Because of our experience with water and the fragility of our water supply, we have put in fixed water troughs, so that one water trough will probably supply 2 or sometimes even 4 paddocks in any one place. And whilst that ties up a bit of capital, what it does do is make a move really, really simple. All we have to do is peel back a fence when we want to move cattle. They move through, we put it back, and that's it. We don't have to move water troughs, and we're not putting up and taking down lines for every move. But that's what suits our system and what makes life easier for us. So what we have managed to do over the last couple of years through being able to take on more land and look at our stocking density is we've been able to move our our demand line down. So where it's sitting at the moment, it goes down, and that releases a whole lot more surplus growth. And it has meant that we've been able to change the way that we graze and just some of the things that we do. So in very simple terms, instead of having that 21-day rotation and quite short covers, so even with the 21 days, we would probably be going into covers of maybe 3,000 kilos of dry matter per hectare, maybe 3.2. We're now going into 3,500 or even 4,000. And we're introducing longer rest periods. So where we were 21 to 24 days, we're now at a sort of minimum of 30 days. And I quite like that 30-day rest because it helps push us beyond a parasite burden in a lot of cases. And it gives us slightly taller covers, which makes us more resilient to increasing weather changes. I'm conscious that I'm talking about more challenging weather when we've just seen some of the weather that we've seen in Southern Europe at the moment, and we get off very lightly here. But we are on quite heavy ground. So whilst that helps us in periods of dry, during wet, we can we can get quite bogged down. So those taller covers help keep us out of the mud slightly. What we found with the longer rests and the taller residuals is we still haven't sacrificed grass growth. We're measuring every week, we're comparing with other farms, and we're still managing to keep good covers. The other thing is now looking at our grass growth curve is how we manage our surplus. So what are you seeing in the two red boxes there? The first one from the peak growth in May is where we're taking our first cut silage. And now we're only taking one cut of silage. And that silage growth will cover one part, usually the beginning of the year. And then where we've got the later summer and autumn surplus, what we're doing is we're deferring that grass, and so that we can graze it further into the winter. What that allows us to do is to again give us a bit more resilience, but it also increases our margins for feeding those livestock. We're not having to feed out that much silage or as much silage anymore, and we're not having to make as much silage, which is an expensive process. But what you can see is that we do have a relatively short grass growth period. So we're only growing grass for 6, maybe 7 months of the year. So we have that 5 or 6 months where we have to fill that gap. And the trick now is to fill that gap as effectively as possible. I'm not going to go into this too much because I appreciate Heather's going to talk about this next. But because we have reduced our demand of grass growth during the year, it allows us the freedom to do a bit more during the winter with deferred grazing. And typically that deferred grazing is what you see in that bottom right picture. The bale grazing at the top there, that was from the first year that we have tried that. And it worked extremely well. Cattle were a lot happier on it, and it was much easier for man and beast as well. So I'm conscious that we're getting on in time. Our change in grazing has allowed us to increase the amount of livestock. Whatever you do, whether you are on 20 one-day rotations or you're splitting between maybe 2 paddocks, you're rocking between 2 fields, moving your livestock is key to all of this. And I think you can develop grazing patterns that suit you and your business as you go, but the first step is to move the livestock. Rest is key if you're to grow your grass. We've cut out all fertilizer out of our system, and we don't grow any less grass. So how much you rest your paddocks and your fields is key to the amount of grass that you grow. And the more you manage your grazing, the more you increase your resilience, especially in the face of climate change. The other thing I would say is that you're taking control of your grass, of your livestock, and of your business, and taking out some of the aspects that reduce your control or that you have no control over. And certainly for me, because it's under my control, it means I can enjoy it more. And if I enjoy what I'm doing more, it's just a lot more fun. And for us in our business, that is absolutely key. So I think that's me. And if any of you are in the north of Scotland, it would be great to welcome you here. More than welcome anytime, and do get in touch if there's any other questions or queries about what we do.
Thank you, Jock. So we have some time for questions. So I think there's one in the chat.
Yeah, I will ask the question out loud, and but actually I heard that the question was answered already. But how old are the animals reaching the slaughter weight? I remember you told that, but
yeah. So it depends on the mix of genetics, but at the moment, so we're putting a lot of animals through to slaughter for our for Christmas for our butcher's shop, and they are all hitting 520 kilos live weight to 550 kilos live weight. So we're getting around about 280 to 300 kilos dead weight. And that gives us a decent amount of fat cover. So they're not big carcasses, but they are finished carcasses. So they have good fat cover. And for us, it allows us to cut those, particularly steaks, so that you can cut them at a reasonable thickness so that people can cook them well to their liking. So they can either cook them rare or well done or whatever their preference is, but they have that option. And it's keeping it to a portion size which is affordable. So that's in the shorthorns to 18 months. And then the Highlanders, pure Highlanders, would be nearer 36 months. But we would hope to get a proportion to the slaughter before their second winter.
okay, thank you. But I have also a couple of questions of mine about you have now two separate herds, so you don't crossbreed the Highland cattle and Shorthorn. You keep them separated.
No, we do cross them. So we keep an element of pure Highlanders because I want the Highland cow stands up really well in the winter here. Our biggest problem here is not necessarily cold and snow, it's rain and wind. And the Highlander really is very resilient to that. But we will cross the Highlanders with the Shorthorn as well to get a proportion of the animals moving through the system a bit quicker. And then we'll keep some relatively pure Shorthorns as well. So it's to try and get, because we need that 12-month supply through the year, we need that mixture of finishing times, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. And another quick question is, I assume you castrate your bulls, so you have steers. And what do you say about if you're slaughtering steers or heifers? Does the steers require like longer period for getting fat on the grass, or you don't see that?
I don't see that too much. So yes, we castrate all our bull calves within a couple of days of birth. So we ring them. And the other thing I should say is we calve quite early. So we start calving towards the end of February, which would be unusual for this sort of system. Most people would be calving a lot later, but we castrate pretty much at birth. And no, I don't see that much of a difference in finishing. There is a slight difference, but at the moment it's mostly steers that are going into the butcher's shop, and they're finishing really quite well.
Okay, I hope I hope I have a little more time to ask another question. What age are you weaning the calves from the cows? Weaning.
So we're trying to tighten up our calving, but we used to calve at 180 days. We last year, and it was 210, and 2/3 of our calves this year are weaned. We're just weaning at the moment is 210 days, but we are taking about a third of our calves and looking to wean later on, 250 to 280 days, and looking to see what that does as to how well we can carry our calves through the winter. So at the moment, we're trying to get balance between whether we house them or outwinter our calves. But it goes back to one of our key objectives, is that growing cattle must always grow.
And another question I have is about this deferred grass. How long is in your system? No, you still graze the first round and then don't let the animals on, but is then it's a 60 days or like end of June or end of July, and then you save this grass to the October, November and December, or how long this deferred grass growing?
Yes.
Staying?
So we would be deferring it after if it was, say, a first cut of silage, we would then not, and it would then be taken for a second cut. We won't take the second cut. So it would be normally from probably mid to end July that it would be deferred. And we're still not on it at the moment. We'll start grazing it in a couple of weeks' time. So you're talking about a good couple of months.
I'm going to add, so can I add? Because I think what's interesting is that Jock and I aren't that far away from each other, but we have lots of similarities and also lots of differences in the systems. And so, for example, our Angus cattle are on a hill block at the moment of deferred grass that the last time they were on it was last winter. So we only use that whole area only in autumn and winter. And that allows us also to optimize the species diversity in the flowering plants during the summer season. So a lot of what Jock was showing in a lot of the pictures was kind of in by close to the farmhouse productive grassland that definitely benefits from maybe that shorter rotation, and there are opportunities, as Jock has talked about, deferring some of that possibly. But I think there's deferred grazing can be on a scale or a spectrum. And so for us, there are areas that we will shut off from July, as Jock said, and then others that we only graze in the winter. So I think it's about working out what works best in your setting. What we're finding just now, it's been 15 degrees C here this week, which is very, very odd for this time of year in this part of Scotland. And the grass is growing again quicker than it would normally be at this time of year. And I think that deferring grass and managing our grass in this way allows us to deal, as Jock said, with those different climate issues and respond to them much more quickly than if we had settings where we were just grazing and then taking animals inside. Actually, we can potentially come back onto ground at the end of the winter that we've grazed now, possibly if we then add in some hay or some silage, for example. So yeah, I think there's so much more flexibility when you start managing your grazing in a more controlled rotational way.
Okay, now I have one question in chat about breeding. How do you select your breeding bulls and heifers as replacement animals? Do you look EBVs, and which ones, or some other parameters?
So I primarily look at EBVs, and I'm looking for maternal traits, although that's slightly changing. So to begin with, I was selecting on calving ease because we had a calving problem. I think you can go too far down that way, but so we are, but it is very maternal traits that we are looking for, and we're using maternal breeds. So and that's important for us because we need animals that hold condition during the winter, but will also flesh up a bit easily. We also are very careful about where we get our bulls from. So because we are Pasture for Life, the selection the availability of bulls that we have, if we were just to go to Pasture for Life, is quite limited at the moment. But we do try and select farms that are as close to what we do as possible. It's selecting farms that aren't really feeding their bulls. So we'll go direct to farm. We won't go to, I don't know what the practice is with you, but you know, a lot of bulls are bought and sold through an auction market here, which means they're really heavily fed on high concentrate diets. And then you have to manage those bulls really carefully before you put them into a breeding program. So we're trying to get bulls that are already grown up with a pasture and forage system, and but have those maternal traits, good temperament, physical fitness to them as well.
Thank you. Now it's again about grassland. As I understood, you have some of the like short-term grasslands also that you have seeded. So the question is, how many different species you are having on these seeded grasslands?
Yeah, so I have discovered that whilst I am not very good at a lot of things, I'm very good at killing herbs. It is a particular talent that I have. We have played with multi-species swards as a reseeding process and had not very good results. For us, we farm for resilience, and what works for us, or what I can manage, is clover and ryegrass, and it seems to work really well for us. I would love to see a bit more species diversity in our swards, but that clover ryegrass mix allows us to grow a lot of grass and utilize it, and I don't have to. It's quite flexible in how it's grazed. So, you know, whilst I try and keep slightly longer rotations, if push comes to shove, I can come around a lot quicker, and I'm not having an adverse effect, certainly in the short to medium term, on those lays. The other thing I would say is that since we've started rotational grazing, we aren't having the pressure of having to reseed. So our lays are lasting a lot longer, to the point we used to break a grass lay up with a winter forage crop. So we would call it a stubble neat, but like a small turnip and fodder radish and all these sort of things. But actually, because we're not having to reseed, we now don't put in those forage crops as well. So it's that there is a huge saving in both financially and in time, actually, which I think is our most important resource, in not having to do those things. But the basis of that is that clover and ryegrass mix. We're maybe seeing some more species come in, but it's pretty few and far between. I think it's our next opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Katie, you have to write or tell me when I have when I don't have time to ask questions anymore, because I don't have a track of that. But there is another question about castrating the bulls. You told that, I remember that in 2 days, not quite soon, and you banding. I know that in Estonian audience, it's not allowed in EU, and we don't do it. But do you use, maybe it's a question for Nikki, does it really common in UK, or do you use also other castrating methods in such a young age? Because this is good for the really young animals. But is this like a common practice in UK?
Yeah, I'd say banding is quite common. We don't band, so we cut at much older, around sort of 6 to 7 months, with local anaesthetic and pain relief. That allows us to, as we're growing our herd and wanting to, we're much newer at this. Jock's family have been building strong genetics in their herd for a couple of generations, and for us it's very new, so we're wanting to make sure that we can potentially select bulls and wanting to allow that calf growth to make selections a bit later on. So we're not castrating in the first couple of days. As I said, we wait until sort of 6 months, and then we're castrating at that point, if we are castrating any of our bull calves. We're seeing a bit of a shift in pasture for life farms. More people are doing that, and shifting to a later date, but that's because many of them have pedigree animals and they're wanting to potentially then keep bull calves and have opportunities to select. So they don't want to band everything young and then regret that decision. So it just, they'll have the opportunity to have an additional income stream by selling pedigree bulls, for example. So we are seeing a shift in pasture for life, but it's fairly standard to be doing in the first couple of days banding. Jock, I don't know if you want to add to that. I'm conscious of time.
Yeah, so we always used to castrate when we weaned at about 6 months, and again that was because of the pedigree elements of the Highland breeding. Pedigree breeding is not something I'm interested in. We buy in our replacement bulls. We keep a closed herd, and the only thing that comes in is our bulls. So banding at birth for us works a lot better. We were finding that castrating later on was causing more of a check in their growth rates. So for us, because we didn't have that pedigree element, it makes more sense to band earlier on. And sometimes for the Highlanders, we do have to castrate. Their bulls don't drop quite often when they're young, so they do have to be castrated later on. And we do notice a difference with those animals. But because we're dedicated to finishing animals that we're breeding ourselves, it's just easier to band them.
Okay, thank you. Now there's a question about the growth of the young animal. That how big is the this growth of the not weaned animals in between this period from autumn to spring? But actually, when you are weaning the animals, I lost this. Do you keep them with the mothers? If you calve in February, then
February, March, April, we will be calving.
Yeah.
And so we're weaning now. The shorthorns will do, whilst they're before weaning, they'll do about 1 kilo, 1 to 1.2 kilos a day. And whilst the Highland calves will do about 0.7, 0.8. 2 to 400 days. We've really struggled with our 2 to 400 day management over the last 5 years. But last year they were doing around about 0.5 between 2 to 400 days. So over that winter period. And then over this summer, they've been around about 1.5. This is for the shorthorns. They've been doing about 1.5 at grass. The Highlanders have been about 1. And then as we get closer to the autumn, the shorthorns drop to about 1, 1.1, and the Highlanders are down to about 0.7, 0.8, maybe a bit lower.
Mm-hmm. but it's still I have a question that if you are weaning, then the mothers will stay in the pasture and the young animals come to the barn, or you use just separate pastures?
So we, over the last 5, we have tried to outwinter our calves and young stock, and we haven't been successful in doing that to maintain an element of growth. So what we have done this year is our calves have been weaned, and because of the weather that we've had recently, we've weaned them onto a clean, separate pasture away from their mums. So we just abrupt wean, I'm afraid. You know, one day they're with their mums, the next day they're not, which is quite stressful, and I think it's something we need to look at. But they've gone onto a separate pasture, and at some point they will come inside. So we will house them until mid-February, and then we'll put them back out onto deferred grazing and silage, and our cows will come in to calve. So we calve indoors. Cows will come in to calve, and then once the calves are 2 or 3 days old, they'll get put outside if weather permits.
Okay. And I think it's the last question is about when I saw in the slides, that you also you have like bale grazed or feeding bales of silage. So you put the bales on the pasture and separate them with a electric line. So, but how with the plastic? How you cut the plastic? You afterwards clean the bottom of the plastic there, or how it works? Like, don't they tackle it in the mud? That's my question.
Yeah. So what we did last year, and Heather's going to talk about this a lot better than I will. But what we did last year is we cut the wrap at the bottom of the bale. So you're taking off the top of the plastic, and all you're left with is a disc that's underneath the bale. And then the following day, we'll come and remove that disc.
Okay.
So we're not, we didn't use silage rings, so we didn't put a ring feeder around the bale. So which it wastes a bit of silage, but it just means that we're not having to lug it around. Yeah, the disc just sits under the remnants of the silage, and you just pull it out the next day. It works quite well.
Okay, thank you. I don't ask any more questions, otherwise we don't get to another lecture, but I will speak a bit Estonian again. Et palun need, kes tulid nüüd hiljem liitusid, vaadake üle oma nime kuju. Ühesõnaga, et kui teil on ainult eesnimi või ainult perekonnanimi või mingi muu nimi, siis palun chatis on kirjas, kuidas seda muuta, et oleks täisnimi, sest seda on teil omal pärast vaja. Aitäh. But thank you, and Nikki, you can go further with the next slides.
Amazing. Jock, thank you so much. Obviously, you're welcome to stay, but I know you've probably got a lot going on. So thank you so much for a brilliant presentation. And it was great to have your expertise for that session. So, yeah. Thanks all very much, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I'm going to crack on then with our next session. So we've thought about, although Jock has touched on winter management, we're really going to focus on that in this next session. And we're joined by Heather. I don't know if you want to give us a wave, Heather. Nice to see you. So Heather is joining us from southwest Scotland, where it's very wet. It's quite soggy, much wetter than where Jock and I are. So I'm going to give you a bit of kind of a guidance or just sort of information about more general winter management, particularly bale grazing, and touch on some of the work, the research work that we've been doing at Pasture for Life on this. And then similarly to Jock, Heather is going to focus on her farm. Now, Heather has to leave on time at 15:15. So if there are questions that take us over, I think we're going to have a break then. But if there were questions, then I can answer those if Heather does need to go. So bear with me while I get my presentation up and running again. Okay, I've got some videos in this one, so hopefully they will show okay. Can you see that? I can't see any of you, so
Yes, it's visible.
excellent, thank you. So I want to talk a bit more specifically about that winter management, that bale grazing and deferred grass, and I want to talk a little bit about the bale grazing field lab. So that's a photo of me and my husband rolling out one of our hay bales a few winters ago with our Shetland and Galloway cattle in that picture. And we've been working with 6 other farms over the last few years to better understand the implication of this approach. So it is the first attempt at quantifying the soil health and pasture productivity of bale grazing or after bale grazing in the UK. This research just hasn't been done at all here, and we know that there has been some work done in Canada, and so we've taken a very similar approach. And I just thought it'd be worth talking a little bit about the research, because I think a number of us over the last 5 years or so have been doing this, but we don't really know and haven't been able to quantify the impact, the sort of so what. So I thought it'd be useful to talk about that, and then Heather can do the kind of focus on the practical side of things. So our levy board, the AHDB, have provided additional support to the project, and they've actually funded a cost benefit analysis to actually understand the economic benefits as well, which I will touch on. I just thought it'd be worth talking about the farms involved in this. So there are seven farms involved in the project. Grampian Graziers, that's us in Aberdeenshire. We've got Whitrig's farm, and Stuart you're going to hear from a little bit later this afternoon about his arable integration. Alnham Farm in Northumberland, they have 230 cattle, and you can see the picture on the right-hand side. That's their bale grazing when I visited last March. Galborough is in Cumbria. They have 65 cattle. We have farms then going further south into England, Trefler, Barton Hall and FAI. And you can see that we have a real mix of size of herds. So everything from 30 cattle right through to 300. And so what we've been trying to do is gather data from all of these different farms using bale grazing. All of these are using hay rather than silage. So many of them started on silage and realized that actually it's much easier to bale graze with hay. And so we've seen a real shift in the practice away from silage towards hay, even though challenging weather over the last 2 years for hay making has had an impact. It's been harder to make hay, but a lot of them choosing to take an early cut of hay in May time, particularly for upland farms, would be very early to take a hay cut, but trying to get that hay in the bag ready so that it can be put out at the end of the summer, ready for bale grazing in the autumn and winter. The cost benefit analysis, there's a lot of information here, and I've shared the slides with the team, so I'm sure they'll be able to take that and translate any of this so that it's got a little bit more information for you. But essentially, the benefits are that we have good quality in hay plus the deferred grass, because you always want to bale graze on deferred grass, provide sufficient nutritional needs for a cow. And it says here a dry cow, but we also run our cows with calves because we don't wean. With one of our herds, we don't wean, and then another herd, we wean very late. So we are really, really happy with the condition of the cows and the calves growing together on that bale grazing. And I think Heather is similar. Obviously, this approach reduces the straw cost of housing, and it reduces a lot of the fuel and labour costs as well. And it means that we can shift from daily tractor use to ATVs, UTVs, for example, when bale grazing. And we also make sure, all of us, that we're setting out bales early in the summer or during the summertime so that we're not making hay, bringing it in, taking it out again. And actually, we find that there are no problems with it sitting out on pasture. We don't see that there are any issues around the bales getting moldy or anything. And what we found is that there are some challenges, which means that we're having to shut up fields, which means we can't graze it during the summer. But like Jock identified and I've talked about, if we make sure that we've got good rotations in the summer, it doesn't matter because we're doubling our grass growth then anyway. So actually allowing this has to form for all of us in these systems. It has to form part of that more rotational focused of grass management. And so all of the participants reported non-financial benefits, so well-being, work-life balance, and biodiversity improvements. So these were all things that currently are non-financial, but biodiversity, absolutely, going forward, we're seeing payments for natural capital and public goods coming in. And we found across the cost-benefit analysis that there was a net financial benefit of £1.58 per day. So maybe a couple of euros per day, per animal per day, which is half the cost of housing. So it reduces costs significantly and actually means that it keeps the herd viable within that wider system. And for us, in our experience, we outwinter all of our cattle. So whereas Jock was outwintering his cows and then his housing calves, for us, every animal gets outwintered. We don't have sheds, and mostly it's on deferred grazing. And we use bale grazing as a late winter buffer, a bad weather option. And we also use it for bracken management and seed distribution. So we buy in species-rich bales that come from donor sites that have very species-rich grassland. And that's what we're using for our bale grazing. And we always have bales set up ready for bad weather, so that if needed, we can take animals to them, and they've got shelter behind hedges or trees, they've got their bales, they've got water, and we can just leave them to it. Or we can be more strategic about where we put our bales and actually move across a field, for example. This winter, we have got 3 groups. So we've got our 2 separate herds that we run on 2 different farms and our bulls on another group. And for us and for many in these systems, water is a key consideration. We use continuous flow troughs, so they are being fed by streams or other natural water sources and allow us to keep the water flowing. And I've got a video that shows that flowing at -15 degrees. And we have emergency 1,000-litre troughs as a backup, which we can fill and just leave them full. And then if we need to, we can bring animals back to them. And we mix rolling out of hay, but also depending on what we want to achieve, we sometimes feed on end. So an example here on the left-hand side, we've got our Shetland herd having a bale of hay rolled out across snow. So this was just last winter. And then on the right-hand side, an Angus group who have had a bale that's on end. And I don't know if you can see, but just in the background on the left-hand side of that photo, the browny kind of looking plants, that's bracken. I'm not sure how much of an issue it is for you in Estonia, but it can become quite invasive. And so we feed hay on end like this on these bracken areas because it allows us then to reduce the bracken and actually get more grass growing. So we use it both as a feed source, but also as a tool to change the plants that are growing. On the left-hand side, you can see a bale there that's been rolled out. And this was really quite late in the year. So this was kind of coming into March last year. So you can see the cows have been out all winter. It's coming into March. We had a really wet year, which is why there's so much kind of yellow sort of smushed grass on the ground. But it kind of doesn't matter because the cows can pick through the green that's left, and then they have their bale rolled out. And you can see the edges of the bale have become kind of dark, and they have kind of stained a bit from getting wet. But actually in the middle of the bale, the hay is absolutely fine. And I've just got an image, video here of my husband rolling a bale out. So that's quite a small group, but you can see just rolling the bale. They're very polite. They don't barge around. They wait for us to roll it out, and then they're straight in to eat. What I would say, this herd is mixed polled and horned. So some don't have horns and some do. And by feeding the bale out like this, it means that they all get plenty of space to eat the hay. And there's no issues around bullying or any behavioural problems with the mix of horned and polled, which is really, really great in our system. And on the right-hand side, this was back in October. We really struggled to get bales out this year and finding a time to do it. This right-hand picture is setting the bales out in October alongside a hedge. So they get really good protection from the north. So if we have a north wind, even though that hedge is, the trees will have lost their leaves, there's still quite a lot of shelter in there for them. So all of that line of bales is set out so that if we get really, really bad weather, we've got plenty of shelter and opportunity for the animals to get something to eat. Sorry, just had a bit of a cough. And again, I just wanted to highlight here on the left-hand side, I talked about continuous flow. So this is last winter. The temperature was -15 on the day I took this video, and I think you probably will be having similar sort of temperatures in Estonia. So let me just take a video here. So that's just the first little group of cows. All the others were further behind, and they were all coming up the hill for a drink. You can see that they've kind of trampled their way up through the snow. But yeah, it does get, we are quite high. We are 400 meters above sea level, and we're on the edge of the Cairngorm Mountain. So the weather can get quite tricky here in the winter. But in that middle photo, again, just kind of showing that we lay our bales out much earlier in the year. We've got that grass underneath them. And on the right-hand side, I hope you can see exactly where the bale was in that picture. And you can see that there's a real difference in the grass that kind of just looks quite different. It's a bit taller, it's a bit thicker. So we are seeing a real shift in the grassland after bale grazing that actually it's helping us then to add carbon and nutrients into the soil and grow more grass. Excuse me, I just got a cough. So this is our deferred grazing in the... Oh, excuse me. On the left-hand side, my dog for scale. This was taken a week and a half ago. So this was the area that I said that we only graze when I was talking earlier with Jock, that we only graze in the winter. So that gets rested all summer. It's amazing, full of beautiful wildflowers all during the summertime. A lot of them obviously have gone over and died now, but during the autumn, this is the sort of deferred grazing that we're coming onto. So it's really thick, permanent pasture, thick sward, lots and lots of there for the animals to eat. Quite a lot of this kind of taller tufted hairgrass, Descampsia, which is very tufted and has these kind of tall seed heads, but the animals just kind of graze through it, trample it, eat it. Lots and lots of fibre in there to keep them full, but a good amount of green protein as well. So we've managed to do samples on our grass during January and February, the last few years, and we're still getting 18% protein in the grass. So we're, not necessarily here, but in some of the more improved grassland areas. So deferring that grazing, managing that grass for deferring, we're still able to get really good quality protein in that grass, which is helpful as we go into preparing for calving. The right-hand side, again, our cattle are amazing. They're really hardy, as I'm sure many of you are out wintering, and it's great to see actually just how well they thrive, and they do so well in what can be quite wet, windy and snowy conditions, and the calves just seem to do so well and thrive on it, which we're really proud of and pleased with. And just a final couple of slides here. So on the left-hand side, and this is my cattle last week. I was moving them on. So again, this is our deferred grazing. Again, this is another area with this group that we only really graze in the winter. It's important for ground nesting birds, particularly curlew and lapwing. And so we don't like to graze it during the summer and spring when there are nests and young birds. So we're grazing this only really in winter, and we do take it down quite hard. They're quite excited to move that day onto fresh grazing. And one of the things that we really found interesting last winter was that I think historically, if it snowed, we would have thought, oh, we need to feed hay. And we've been really sort of taking lots of learnings from ranchers in Canada. And, if they all say that if there's grass that's poking out above the snow, the cattle will know that it's there and they can kind of graze it. Again, something I'm sure all of you are very familiar with, but it just, you know, never ceases to amaze me that these animals and these calves here, for example, learning quite young, that there's plenty there for them to eat. And an older cow coming in there and telling them to get out the way so that she can make the most of that grass. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to hand over to Heather. Bear with me a second while I get Heather's presentation up. But Heather, do you want to just start introducing yourself whilst I get your presentation up?
Hello, lovely to virtually meet you all. Great to be talking. So my name's Heather Close, as Nikki said. I farm on the southwest coast of Scotland, which is quite a wet part of Scotland. We're actually in the drier part of that wet part of Scotland. I have been farming for 5 or 6 years. My dad's been doing it for another 10, 15 years on top of that, but I wasn't brought up on a farm. So I have been learning as we go along. Dad's been rotationally grazing and outwintering for 10 years. So he's been a very good person to learn from. So yeah, so this
Heather,
is
that showing, Heather? Is is your slide, is that okay?
Yeah.
Cool.
Sorry, sorry, I didn't. Are you going to move them?
Yeah, I will do. I just wanted to make sure you could see it, so I will move on.
Oh, yes, I can. Yeah. So this is what one of our wee Hereford heifers. So you can see where we are on the screen, just on the west coast. Our total farm grazing size is 100. Well, the total farm is 136 hectares. Grazing is 117, and we have about 14 hectares of woodland. So the ground is soft but deep and quite fertile. So it's got 22% clay. So it's not too bad, but it's soft enough. And we're a bit sandier towards the sea and a bit siltier away. 40 to 145 meters above sea level, so a lot lower than Nikki. And the 30-year average rainfall is just over a meter. The first winter, the first year I was grazing with Dad, we had 1.5 meters. So that's affected how I graze going forward. Once you've had 300 mil in a month, you remember it. So the herd, we have 40 to 50 cows. So that's right now, that's about 100 animals on the farm. We have a mixture of Aberdeen Angus and Hereford. So Dad's been breeding commercial type Aberdeen Angus for the last 20 years. We've also got a few native Angus that we've added in recently. We have traditional Herefords, which are horned and a bit smaller. Then we also have some really small Herefords, which we imported the embryos from the States. We have 2 cycles of the bull in with the cows, so about 45-day bulling period. We calve from mid-April, which is a bit earlier than Nikki, but we're a bit further south, as you could see on the map. Our cows carry the calves over winter, and we wean them. It's generally, I keep trying to get to March, but it's generally the end of February. And we notice that some of the cows have already started kicking off their calves by then, because they will start calving in mid-April, especially the younger ones. They are 100% pasture fed, and we do bolus them twice a year for cobalt mainly and iodine. So the grazing system, we haven't used any fertilizer since 2018. Dad, he hadn't used much the few years before that, and he tried to, I think he planned on stopping in 2018, but there was a really droughty spell, so he ended up kind of feeling a bit of pressure to get the grass growing, so he put a bit of fertilizer on. And 2 or 3 weeks later, when the rains came, the grass started growing, and as it was the rain, not the fertilizer. And talking to our neighbours, he'd found out that he'd got 2 or 3 times the more grass growth than their neighbours would have done using that same amount of fertilizer. So it was a really easy decision after then to just not use fertilizer. All animals have been outwintered since 2019. That was the year we managed to get the bulls out. The cows have been out since 2011. Cows move daily for over 10 years. We move them 2 to 3 times a day, especially in the winter. We do less than that in the summer. They are mainly on deferred grass, but we unroll bales generally kind of from January through to March. That's when we find the quality of the grass declines a little bit, and they are the cows seem to need a little bit of extra nourishment. So every other day we'll give them a bale, something like that. So their ration is a good portion of grass and the haylage. We rarely manage to get hay because we haven't got our own. A, we don't have the weather, and B, we need contractors to come and cut the hay for us. So if we do get the weather, everyone else is in the queue. We're quite small, so we're normally further to the back. So it's haylage bales that we tend to unroll. This is, I should have got a better photo of this thinking about it. This is our little bale unroller. Because our ground is quite wet, we find that this works with the bale transferring all the pressure. So you've got a greater area. That works better rolling it out on the ground. I think if we had one of the bigger bale unrollers, the tires would get stuck in the ground sometimes. Our fields are subdivided into 1 hectare paddocks. So this makes planning easier for us. We use fiberglass stakes and we stick them out. I was an engineer and a project manager in a previous life, so I'm very into my spreadsheets. So I have a grazing plan. It's not that complicated, but I like marking out where everyone's been, where the cows have been and where they're going. And these hectare paddocks are really useful for that. Plus they make setup easier because you have the semi-permanent fences out there already. We've been increasing rest periods since, well, the last 4 or 5 years. Now we graze most fields twice a year. So they'll get a good graze in the winter. And I tend to only plan on grazing them once in the winter because where we are, there's a slide in a minute which is showing you the amount of rainfall and how it spreads out throughout the year. But we can get 40, 50 mil overnight. And sometimes we have 250 mil. That's normally about as high as we go of rain in a month. So and that really affects how much grass is left over. If the cows are grazing when it's dry, then you might have 5 or 6 inches left. If it's wet, there could be nothing. So it's that balance. Obviously you can't predict the weather. So I plan for grazing once in the winter, and then if we've had a good dry spell, there's a possibility that grass could be used, what's left could be used coming up to spring or something. And then we give all fields, like we only generally graze them twice a year, 2 or 3 times, but as an absolute minimum, 30 days rest. We find that works really well with controlling parasites. We haven't had to worm for, I think, 15 years. Liver fluke's still a bit of an issue, but we haven't had to worm. Thanks, Nikki. So the benefits to us, so it's less exposure to commodity price swings. We don't have to worry about fertilizer or feed costs varying over the year or the decade. It's relatively low cost. Labour is obviously the highest one. Resilient, it provides a bit of a buffer. Like the grazing outside and the building up the soil health builds a bit of a buffer with the weather. And lots of options in what you can do and how you can manage the herd over the year. Haven't had to treat for parasites, as I said, other than liver fluke, and liver fluke's declining. I was wondering if that might be due to the longer grass, but I was just at a training day the other day, and apparently the cysts, the liver fluke cysts, just sit on the top of the grass and grow with it. So I don't know if that is the cause, but I would imagine the longer grass, there's fewer cysts per volume of grass, I would hope anyway. Need to trim feet is very rare. When Dad first started buying in bulls, he'd have to treat their feet very often. As soon as we started outwintering the cows, that's become a very rare issue. Cows are fitter at calving. We've moved since I've been there, we've moved the weaning from kind of November time to February, March, and we haven't had to treat any calves for pneumonia since we've done that. I think it avoids the double shock of winter approaching and weaning at that point. And then, yeah, I really enjoy being out there in nature, moving the cows, except on wet Februarys. So this is our 2 extremes of the rainfall we've had since I've been here. So over the last 5 or 6 years, the blue is the that February. That's that first year, my full year on the farm. And then the orange is the driest year we've had. We tend to have a drier spell in March, April and May, which I did start planning on, but the last 2 years that hasn't really happened. We've had a lot more rain into May this year, really. But that gives you an idea of the rainfall we're dealing with. If we were further south, there'd probably be another 1,000 mil on top of that. But yeah, thanks, Nikki. That's my dad. So rain, it's more challenging in winter. Like if you have summer rainfall, there's evaporation, the grass is growing, the rain seems to move through the system quicker. When it's cold and it's wet and humid, and the grass isn't growing, it can get muddy quite quickly. So we do use deferred grazing, but we do graze. We have some areas that we don't graze in the summer, but we have others that will do a lightish trim. So tall grass works best for that, but you can see even around the water troughs, you still get some poaching. And we do use portable water troughs, so they move every day, which minimises the poaching, and you also don't get the tracks back and forth to the fixed troughs. So that has helped a lot. And we move them 2 or 3 times a day. And this is largely because we have all the different classes of animals together. So we have calves and young stock, so heifers with their first calf, young steers, and the cows. So by moving them 2 or 3 days, I feel more confident that they're all getting a fresh bite of the grass. It reduces competition, and it also means that they, when they're trampling on the wet grass, you guys will all have seen, I'm sure, it quickly gets muddy when it's wet. Whereas so it becomes unpalatable. So by moving them 2 or 3 times a day, they have a fresh chance at nice tall grass. That's pretty much what I was saying. Yes, thank you. And also more even distribution of manures. We have some quite hilly fields, and out of choice, the cows will stay up at the top. So we make sure we always give them access to flat area at the top, dry flat area, but we do try and encourage them with grass to take themselves and their manure further down the hill. And we have a 5 o'clock AM break for the cows, because we've had over the last few years, we've had a few heifers who got hungry and were jumping over and had a tendency to break the odd fence. So we give them an early break, but we don't do that ourselves, thankfully. We have technology to help us. I think that might be the next slide. No, I'll tell you about what we use so I don't have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning shortly. So this is an example of how we move. So you can see the 2 prior days. This is 2 moves a day, and this was a lovely sunny day last October. So the cows are quite contained. They're relatively close together, but they will have access to the paddock on the left come the afternoon. And we often, if it's wet, we'll often, like if it's dry, we might move the back fence to just to the right of where the cows are. If it's wet, we'll keep it further back so they have grazed land as well as ungrazed land, because this helps spread their action over a greater area and has less impact on the ground overall. Okay, just have a quick drink. And this is our solar gate. So at 5 o'clock in the morning, it's a godsend. Or if you want to go on holiday, you can set these up. They're timed. You can program them for different days and different times. And as you can, there's a hook around the gate hook, and then there's a hook in the back latch, and that turns around with the motor at the right time, and then that spring comes back, and the cows are really used to it. They hear the noise of the spring. Someone catches it. There is an alarm, but that went quite quickly. Then you can hear them start moving. Someone spotted the gates opened, and they all just move through. There is another type of gate, which is a vertical lifter called Pensagro. I don't have experience with that, but other farmers do find that quite useful as well. So what would I suggest if it's really wet? Moving cattle at least daily if you can, and there are benefits to moving them more frequently, as I've said, but obviously there's weighing up the labour costs. and increase the size of the paddock when there's an awful lot of rain. Reduce the use of back fencing, so give them a larger area to walk over. And then if wet or windy or cold, then we give them extra haylage possibly to keep their rumen going. And we'll allow access back to shelter or windbreak. We're quite lucky. We have the hills, and we have trees, so we can hide them behind one or the other one. And then I'm always keen, you're going to see some photos I'm quite embarrassed by soon, but I'm always keen to show people what it can look like. And it, like, you haven't made, well, mistakes happen. Sometimes you get 50 mil of rain overnight and the ground's already waterlogged, or you forget to move them. But the ground does recover really well, quite quickly, I think. So yes, so this was 21, so again, October. And there's really heavy unexpected rainfall. So I run out and move the cows onto a fresh bit of grass. But in the wind and the rain, I'd not been thinking properly, and I shut the cows in. And as you can see, they made quite a lot of mess. But you can see, like, the following two photos, so it was starting to green up already in March, and by the 18th of May, you couldn't tell the difference. There might be a slight brown patch in there if you look very closely, but it had recovered. It does seem to recover really well. It's, yeah, the only type of soil pugging that I really try and avoid is this one. I hate this photo. So this, where we'd use the back latch gate. So this is, we do tend to move them 3 times in early winter, but we'll drop it down to only 1 or 2 times later winter when the ground's wetter, because of this. So we'd set up and move it. We moved the cows at about 10 o'clock. That gate was set up for about 2 o'clock, and then there would have been a early morning one at 5 o'clock in the morning. We'd had a huge amount of, well, the ground was already waterlogged, so we'd had 175 mil in 3 weeks, and as you can see, it's on a slight hollow. But the cows are walking back and forth through that from 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It just made a complete muddy mess. So now, once it starts getting really wet, we basically move the cows at 10 o'clock. When we finish setting up for the next day, we'll give them a second move, just so they both have, the cows and the young stock have a chance to get some nice green stuff. And then we leave the 5 o'clock in the morning back latch, because that allows, by the time the cows have gone in and grazed it, they'll probably only walk through that gate once, twice at the most. So there's a far less damage. It's the 2 o'clock one that did the most of the pugging. So we'd had some wildflower seed, so I put that on there, and you can really see where the that type of that niche that we created was, and it's favoured by marigolds and daisies and a bit of yarrow in there. And then, as you can see, I didn't graze it in the summer because I wanted those lovely wildflowers to set seed, but come winter there's no sign that there was any problem there the previous winter. So nature does recover if you give it the time to do so. As long as you avoid doing the same thing in the same place over and again, there's a solution. And then, because we are grazing outside in the winter and we don't have supplements, and it's important to keep an eye on rumen fill to check the cows are getting enough food. Like when we move them at 10 o'clock in the morning, we'd expect their rumen to be a bit like that, so there's a bit of a hollow there. But come 4 or 5 in the afternoon, we want them to be, or before that, we want them to be full. And then dung scoring, this is really important, because we're using deferred grass. Some of it is older, and it's getting the balance right for your cows. So if it's verging on the central photo, we'd start giving them extra area, or look at how we can get them a bit more protein. Whereas the one on the right, I'd be very happy with. And you will find that about 5% will be too runny or too lumpy, piling up. But as long as the average is about right, and the majority are that kind of consistency, then I don't worry about it. Tips for getting started. I don't know, some of you may already be doing this, I don't know. But there's no right way. So you'll hear from 4 different farmers. You've got 3 guest speakers, and you've got Nikki. Everyone's got a different way of doing it, because everyone's farm and situation is different. Every field's different. You guys all know that. If you currently house, then I'd suggest starting slowly and extend the grazing season. If we had a barn, there are some winters I'd have wanted to use it for a month or two, but think about it as an alternative. Like, it's not, you don't, in Scotland, people tend to house for 6 months. It's quite common, but kind of thinking about it's an option if it's very wet to house them for a wee while. I think that's a useful way to think about it. Keep an eye on your cows, room and fill, dung score, mooing. They will let you know if they need, whether they want anything adjusted. They're quiet cows are happy cows. If they're mooing at you, they're trying to tell you something. I find this really important to keep a record of where and how you graze and for how long. The first time you try and do this, there's no that you can pretend to try and plan. Just record where they have been, and then next year that information will help you start to plan. Well, you can have a plan, but expect not to follow it. Then, yeah, and it's really important to have a good grazing buffer, and it's not just for grazing. As Nikki mentioned, water can be a real issue. So if we do have a deep frost, which isn't that often, we need to have alternative locations in mind where the cows can graze and have access to water. Yeah, this can be a barn or a wooded area or extra haylage or bale pods. We actually have a mini bale pod set up for this winter, which we'll use if we have problems with water, but it's also quite a sheltered area. So if we have a really, really cold frost, and then I've set it up so that if we don't use it over winter, it's in a really good place for the young stock to graze kind of come April, May. Oh yeah, and that's just the team. So it's Dad and I who work. Dad works part-time, I work kind of half-time, and then my sister and her daughter help a day, a morning a week.
Thanks, Heather. I'm delighted that you also had cowpat photos in your presentation, because I talked about that earlier as well. So yeah, I think it's nice nice for us all to be kind of singing off the same hymn sheet, and we have lots of photos of cow poo on our camera rolls. Yeah, so are there any questions?
Yes, there are, but I know that we have a break after 5 minutes or so, or 7 minutes. Yeah. So, but we can. I can ask some questions now, and then
I can stay slightly longer if there are lots of questions. But yeah, you'll have the schedule as well.
Yeah. But maybe it's there are no that specific questions that maybe Nikki can also answer. We have some issues about regulations. A question about that. Aren't there in UK any regulation that that you have to keep your animals housed? No.
No, we have to make sure that animals obviously are high welfare, so that they are not, if animals were out in really bad weather with no feed and no shelter at all, and that was ongoing, then yes, that would be a welfare concern and that could be reported. But I think many of us find that as long as they've got a full rumen, as long as they're fed and they've got either woods or shed or lee of a hill that they can tuck into, then that's absolutely fine.
Okay, thank you. Then another question is any of your areas where you did this 5-year period thing, veil grazing testing, was also in natural protected area?
Yes, so the Galborough Hall farm there in Cumbria, that's in the Lake District, so that's one of our big national parks. The FAI farm in Oxfordshire is a local, I think they're called AONB, area of outstanding natural beauty, but it's a protected landscape. And I think also the one in Treflock in Shropshire that's also another protected landscape. So yes, I think 3, and actually the Northumberland one is in a national park. So 4 of them are in protected landscapes.
I ask this because right now veil grazing is allowed. Oh, no, it's not forbidden in common farm areas, but it's not allowed at all in our heritage meadows. which actually I was thinking that we should send some scientists to UK and say that this doesn't really harm, if it's done correctly, it doesn't harm the natural species at all, because I have tried it. So, but
yeah, it would be worth actually that connection potentially with Galborough, because they weren't allowed, and they've worked with the local National Park Authority and Natural England scientists to kind of prove that actually this is helping them to increase biodiversity and to keep the species richness high and improve a lot of their, like, make their wildflower meadows even more wonderful. So yeah, they've gone through that process to prove that actually it's working. So if you did want to get anybody in touch, we could definitely help with that.
Yeah, I will keep that in mind. But about there was one question about this. It was your Nikki slides about this watering system, that there was always the water was flowing. The question was that how the water is coming to this. This is underground pipe or no?
A mix. So that the video with the cows in the snow, and it was sitting under a drain, so a field drain, so water that comes out through the field, and we put a pipe into the bank. The water comes through the pipe, and then there's a pipe at the bottom of the trough that takes water away, so it keeps it flowing. And in other sites, in other parts of the land, we have a pipe that sits in a stream, so that then just gravity fed, it goes through the pipe down into a trough, and then there's another outflow. So yeah, we always have the trough in the middle and then a pipe coming in and then out, and it's all natural sources. So no, we don't have any underground pipes.
Okay, thank you. And now there was a question of mine actually about this iodine bolus. Is this how you measure? Do you take the blood samples of the animals to see that they need these boluses, or do you measure soil, or how do you know that
we've had problems with calving?
Oh,
so and then the vets tested then. So yeah, we're in an area that is low in cobalt. So yeah, it's some calving problems that we've had in historically. It would be nice. We did think about taking the bolus away, but I think we need to make sure. We'll probably try it for the cows that look the most fittest. And interestingly, Dad did do some blood tests probably 7 or 8, 9, 10 years ago, and the cows that I think he tested 4 or 5 animals, and the cow with the highest level of cobalt in her blood is the one that was still in the system. So she'd obviously had a calf each year and done well out wintering. So maybe there was something integral to her system that was managing to get the cobalt that she needed from the system. So we would be careful about removing the bolus, but it's something we might try with the really fit, healthy, older cows and see how they do, and see if we can remove it from more. And
one thing this seems to be really different from Estonia is also that we always feed salt to animals, but I think this is the sea thing you have there, or in the wind they have already enough salt, so you don't feed any salt.
No, we have done in the past, but we didn't notice much benefit to the cows. They seem to be fine without it. And we did take the boluses away one year, and we tried just with the salt, and we had a really horrible calving. So we do need the boluses for now. And the salt, if the cows don't need it, then it's just in a wet winter, it's another area that will get muddy because they're coming to the salt all the time, same like the water. So it's, yeah, the boluses work well for us for the moment.
Okay.
Just to add, sorry, we do use salt. So just a slightly different, we don't bolus. And again, it's just that thing of different systems. So we blood test every year, and we have been low in iodine, and we've tried not to give salt, and actually it's not been that bad. Like our cows kind of, it wasn't, we had a difficult calving. We had cows, this was the first calving where we knew we were low in iodine, and we had cows not being, like, mothering was a bit of an issue, kind of cows, a couple of rejections, which is really unusual, really unusual for us. So we now give a salt block with minerals in it. So yeah, slightly. We've also been trialing brine. So we have a water trough and then a brine, so salt water trough. And so the cows can select to choose whether they want to drink clean, fresh water or they want salty water. And they always drink out the salt water. They really enjoy it, which has been interesting to see.
Have you ever give them like this apple cider or not cider, vinegar?
Yeah, we use a lot of that. Do you, Heather?
We haven't, no.
Yeah, my husband is obsessed with it. He's always putting some in their water, and yeah, we do use it quite a lot.
That's good to know.
We should probably stop for your break so that you can all have a rest.
There is another question about iodine. No, this bolus goes into the stomach, yes, but this is one farmer says that there is some practice that they will put it on the back of the animals. To use also this in UK, yes.
Yeah. So that's an alternative as well.
Okay, that's very interesting. But now we have a break. Maybe Katie will. I think we have 15 minutes, so everybody can have a coffee or whatever to go to toilet, and then we start again at the half of something. I don't know, half 4.
Thanks,
okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello. We will start again, and I will steal a moment from you, Nikki, to have some things that I was thinking about the last presentation. Also, there was some because I'm usually listening in English, but sometimes I switch to Estonian and listen to translation also. And then I found some things that need to clear out about this last presentation, calving and weaning issues. There was a bit of mix up in translations that these farms animals calves stayed with their mothers until March, I think, yes, and then was weaned and then started
on Heather's farm. On Heather's, the last farm on Heather's. Yeah. So Heather calves from April, and then the calves stay with their mum all the way through until end of February, beginning of March.
Yeah. So the cows will rest like a month and a half.
Yeah, 6 weeks. Yeah.
6 weeks.
But she did say that they found that the cows were already starting to kick the calves off, so they were kind of doing it naturally already.
Yeah, because the translation went a bit like the calves were like falling off the cows. So that's not the issue. So they weaned the calves and themselves. So some of them, and then there was a rest period, and then they start calving a new calves. But another thing that was asked, and it's really new term in Estonia, and we don't have actually a good Estonian name to this, was deferred grass. And I can ask about you that it's basically the same like United States people say stockpiling.
Yeah, stockpile, standing hay, deferred grass, foggage. They're all the words that would be used. Yeah,
because this deferred grass, we actually, even I heard the first time, because the stockpiling is okay, and for Estonians to know that no, it's basically the grass that is left to the not grazed, and as Nikki's case, it may even be the whole year. So if you winter grazed 1 year, and then you didn't graze at all in the summer, and then you went back to the winter, and then you used this grass, it's hard to understand if you have studied some agriculture, because it's all in here that this doesn't this is not the cow's feed, so they should like die on it or something. But if you actually start to doing it, to use it, then you figure out that it still works and it has still nutrients inside. But it's still, in our case, it's an issue that what kind of species are better for using if it's natural, then it's natural. But if it's like not herbal lay, but short-term pastures, then we have to still figure it out in Estonia which species are the best to leave this deferred grass. I have a light feeling with some species, because right now I'm grazing or start to graze in November, something I seeded in end of June. So it's still, some grasses will just rotten or flatten down in end of the grazing season, but some are not. So we have our own trials here yet to do. But now I can give you yes, this is one definitely, and another one is this not ryegrass, but another very heavy and strong leaves has, but I can't say it right now. It's Rokaruhein, it's in Estonia, but whatever. But we will festuca, yeah, yes, festuca, fescue, yeah, tall fescue. Is one, because cows don't really like it when it's in summer, but when it's already frozen, then they start to eat it. But okay, I don't steal any more of your time, so we can go further from here.
Don't worry, thank you. And yeah, again, just to go back to that, the tufted hairgrass that I showed with the big kind of white seed heads, that's another one. So that, yeah, again, another grass that they don't really eat that much, maybe a bit in the spring, but it's really useful in the winter because it's really resilient. So particularly when it's very frosted, it works really, really well in a perennial on a hillside, but maybe less so useful in that temporary grassland. But Stuart is a real expert on this as well. So although this little session is very much about arable integration, feel free to ask questions about wintering. But I'll kick us off, and this is definitely an area I know least about, but I'm going to kind of give us a bit of a context, and then I'm going to hand over to Stuart, who is going to take us through, again, similarly like with earlier, what's happening on his farm. So let me just get my screen shared again. Okay, and hopefully you can see that all right. So when we were asked to come and speak this afternoon, I was asked if we could talk a little bit about this kind of arable integration. And in the UK, the majority of farms that are bringing livestock into the arable system would be with sheep. But what we're finding is that some are using cattle, and I know that cattle are much more prevalent in Estonia, and so it was something that you were interested in. And I want us to take a step back and think about why we would do this. So we've already heard about Groundswell, and I hope that there will be an Estonian group coming over to Groundswell this summer. It'd be great to have you come and visit us. And at Groundswell, which is a brilliant conference, festival that's held in the south of England, they set out right at the beginning of their work what the 5 principles of regenerative agriculture were. And so all the things that we've talked about today really all link back to these principles. So one of them is about diversity, and we've talked about how important it is to have diverse swards, as well as things like hedges and trees on our farm systems, protecting the soil surface. Heather talked a lot about that. Maintaining these living roots, so not overgrazing, reducing the soil disturbance, and in a livestock system, this would very much relate to, not having these areas of pugging, or not having areas that are really overgrazed. And Jock talked about what his system used to be like and how it is now. And then another one is this idea of livestock integration. And sometimes, I don't know what it's like where you are, but in the UK, a lot of mixed farms, so there still are a lot of farms that have livestock and they have arable, but they don't really integrate. They would be mixed, and they would use the straw from the cereal to house the animals or feed animals. and they would use the muck and the dung from the animals back onto the arable system to help build fertility. But that's mixed rather than integrated. And so what I thought we would talk a bit about today is this actual integration where livestock are present on the same fields as we are growing arable crops. And that might be at the same time as the crop is being grown, which is definitely what Stuart's going to talk about. Or it might be where we introduce lays, where we can then use the cattle to graze the lays as part of a rotation to build fertility in the system and to reduce other risks around disease burden or pests, which obviously become increasingly important in not only in arable systems, but particularly in organic arable systems. So I just wanted to touch back on why it is we're talking about this at all. And it is this point around livestock integration as part of one of the underpinning principles of regenerative agriculture. And as I said, generally, there are two ways that we can do this. One is through the use of fertility building lays as part of a rotation, or with late winter or early spring grazing of winter cereals. So cereals that have been sown, cereal crops that have been sown at the end of the summer, going into autumn, and that are then being grazed the following kind of late winter, early spring. And generally what people find is that that's easier with sheep due to their size. There's less risk of them making a mess. But yeah, again, Stuart's going to talk through how they've been using young stock in that system. So I'm going to focus a bit more on herbal lays, fertility building lays, and how cattle can be used in these sorts of systems. Oh, my slides aren't working. There we go. So herbal lays are really important option in the toolbox. And they're a temporary diverse grassland that's mostly used as part of this arable rotation. I'm sure this is stuff you all know. Interestingly, in England, so not in Scotland where Stuart and I are based, but in England, they are becoming increasingly popular because there is funding, very specific funding attached to these of around what would be more than €500 a hectare if you put these in. So these are really, really financially viable, sensible options. And that was because the English government said that they wanted to increase species diversity in fields. And so they're giving lots of money to farmers to put these herbal lays in. And these lays are made up of a mix of grasses, herbs, and legumes, which are delivering soil fertility, biological function, and structure, because they have all different root structures. So we get that structure above ground, that diversity of structure above ground, but we also get structural diversity below ground because of the different root systems, whether they're really deep rooting or shallower rooting. And that really is going to help to make sure that the nutrients are passed from different levels in the soil. And these can all help also boost livestock health by giving a more diverse diet, but also having high tannin levels in some of these plants, like, for example, in the bird's foot trefoil, plantains, etc., chicory as well, which will help reduce parasite burden for livestock. They obviously, because they're very much made up of flowering plants, encourage biodiversity and can be productive with lower rainfall. So they deliver that resilience, something that we've heard about in all three sessions today. And generally with herbal lays, 4 years would be considered an optimal length. So within the rotation, having rotation lengths will vary. And again, Stuart, as somebody who is farming both livestock and arable, will be able to talk more about his organic rotation. I know that, for example, in Denmark, the rotation would be maybe 2 years max temporary grassland and then back into an arable system. Generally in the UK, our temporary grasslands would probably be 4 years. So 4 years out of a 7-year rotation would be a temporary grassland, a herbal lay, and then you'd have 3 years of different crops. So 4 years is considered this kind of optimal length, which allows for root growth, soil fertility building, and increases that high species diversity. But if you can keep it going for even longer, then absolutely you're going to see better outcomes for soil, although you may well see a decline in species diversity unless they're carefully managed and allowed to go to seed. I think it's important to remember that these seed mixes are designed for a particular purpose. From a personal point of view, I think that perennial, permanent pastures with native plants offer so much and shouldn't be overlooked. But within an arable setting, herbal lays can deliver huge amounts of benefit, not only to the livestock, but also to that wider arable system. So there are some really, really good resources for you to go away and have a look at through the Soil Association and the Cotswold Seeds, who obviously sell the herbal A's, but they have a knowledge bank. The links are on the PowerPoint, so they can be shared through afterwards. So I really recommend looking at those, maybe making use of Google Translate to help understand maybe some of the technical terms in there that might be very specific to particularly to UK funding rules. But yeah, definitely have a look at both of those resources on herbal A's. They will give you a lot of information. Generally, what we say is that there are some kind of top tips for managing herbal A's. And what the first one would be not to graze them too quickly. So once you've sown your herbal A, whatever your establishment approach might be, then, you know, making sure that you're not putting animals on there too quickly, doing the pull test where you're pulling the plants and making sure that they're not just ripping out the ground, because obviously we know cows graze by wrapping their tongue around the plant. So the last thing you want is that every plant they wrap their tongue around comes up from the roots. You want to make sure that they're really well established before you graze them, as would be the same for any recently established lay. But particularly with some of these herbal lays, they do need that bit of time just to make sure that they're well established. Again, like with the wintering management that we've talked about, rotational grazing is vital. Having electric fencing, making sure your animals are used to electric fencing, that you can use this to subdivide, move animals on, and not allow them to stay in the same area for too long. And I think that then by controlling that grazing, you can maintain these high entry covers, allow those plants really to get nice and tall, much higher than the kind of 4,000 4,000 kilos of dry matter per hectare. We want them to, we want this to be high. We want high covers, and you'll generally find that your normal kind of sward stick or your plate meters just don't work in these settings. Though there is a company called Rumi who work across Europe that you can use for mapping your grasslands, and they have developed a plate meter that can be used for these much taller covers. If you're interested, I can share the details by email afterwards. But these high entry covers are important, and one of the reasons why that and maintaining a good residual are really key. What I often find with these herbal lays is that you go into them in the middle of summer, they look amazing. They're 6 foot tall, they're full of flowers, they've got bees buzzing all over them. They're really, really gorgeous. You put your animals in, the animals graze, you get a bit of rain and they absolutely melt. And there's very little basal ground cover. So at the point where the plant meets the ground, actually the amount of cover down there is pretty low if you graze it too hard. So maintaining a good residual really helps to make sure that you can hold animals up and that you're not having issues relating to that poaching, the risks of runoff and losing soil. And maintaining a good residual keeps those roots quite well established in the ground, allows the plants to recover and maintains the ability for them to flower. If you graze all the flowers off, you're reducing the potential for them to go to seed and to maintain the persistency over time. These longer rest periods that we've talked about are really important. So rotational grazing or mob grazing, where you're creating longer rest periods to really allow these plants to get up and set seed is key, but also being aware of bloat. And if you've not got animals that are used to these really kind of quite powerful covers, particularly with very high levels of clover in them, you really need to be careful and make sure that you're reducing that risk of bloat and you're keeping an eye on animals and making sure that, that checking their dung, checking their rumen, and really keeping a close eye, making sure there's plenty of forage, that there's other roughage available, whether that's straw, for example, or you can use apple cider vinegar oil on the water, on their drinking water to help that. I'm just going to rattle through quickly to say that, as we've identified already, the graze and rest approach is vital. That mob grazing with the long rest period is really the best way to utilize these herbal lays and these swards, with the 30 to 60 day rest between grazings, depending on time of year, definitely being optimal. And having those high covers, with 60%-ish of the sward being eaten, 30 trampled, 20 left standing. Those figures are movable. It's about what's right for your system, weather conditions, all of that sort of thing. But, really thinking about that infrastructure, that electric fence, your water, planning, using your brain, thinking about where those animals are going to be, and making sure that you've put all that time and energy into your planning so that you get the best possible outcomes. I'm going to stop there. So I've really rattled through these, but I want to give plenty of opportunity for Stuart to present, and then also for to pick up on any other questions at the end, because yeah, just to make sure we've got plenty of time for that. So Stuart, I'm going to hand over to you. I'm going to get your slides up. If you want to just say hello and introduce yourself as I'm doing that, and then we can crack on from there.
Right there, thank you very much. Yeah, so it's a bit nervous with all these participants on here, but here we go. Yeah, I'm Stuart Mitchell. I'm on a family farm in the south of Scotland. We've got 1,000 acres or 442 hectares. That'll be. It is. It's a beef, venison, and arable farm. We've got 140 suckler cows. We've got 330 red deer, and we've got 50 hectares of arable. The whole farm has been organic since 2020, and it was a big change getting into this system, but it's working well, and we can see progress. We know our animals are healthy. We know our crops are getting better, and our work-life balance is getting better as well, which is quite an important thing. So I kind of believe having a mixed farming system on your farm is the best. It's what organic originates around. Your arable crops deplete you, but you top it back up with your cattle, the dung of the cattle, and also the fertility building crops you can have that your cattle will eat. The grass, the permanent pasture, I'd agree with Nikki, is best, but obviously on arable that doesn't work. But it is good to get some permanent pasture that's had a hard life, get it back out and get a fresh start if you're wanting to get a cash crop off of there. We have it'll be a 10 or 12 year rotation. There's 3 years grain in there, which is winter oats, and spring barley. That'll be undersown, and then it goes into herbal hay after that. It'll be then in the herbal hay for 8 years, which is a bit longer than normal, but with grazing it with only cows and only grazing it between 3 and 4 times a year, we're getting persistence in the crops to do quite well, and it means that as long as we don't trash it in the winter, it'll come back pretty good. When it comes to fertility building, like having muck, which a normal mixed farm would have in a shed, or normally in Scotland anyway, putting muck back out is better than nothing. But having the cows putting the dung there and just straight out of them and their urine as well, it's best that those two components are kept completely separate. The dung will attract a lot of biodiversity, a lot of dung beetles, a lot of flies and things, and they'll break that down into the soil pretty quick. And the urine will be separate, and I'm not entirely sure the reason, but they are better kept completely separate. But if you can build fertility with the cattle eating high quality, like especially red clover or something along that line, for a couple of years, even a year, have the cattle on there eating that, breaking it down into the soil. When the clover like that's eaten quite at big length, it'll dump a lot of its nitrogen just straight into the soil when it's under stress, which is when the cattle eat it. And it's just building that fertility back into your soil to then, if you're mainly arable with a bit of fertility building with cattle, it gives you a quick boost of fertility again, but it's having a year or 2 years free of weeds that are like either annual or perennial and that are like ryegrass, trying to smother that out and not give it the conditions to grow for another year. So it is when we plant our herbal ley, it's quite important for us that there's basically no ryegrass in it at all, because when you plough that back out again to go into grass, to go into cereal, I mean, it can just become an absolute nuisance, and a ryegrass is not really any good anyway in a herbal ley. As Nikki said, like some of these crops can grow 6 feet tall with very tall, thick plants that need to last growing for about 3 or 4 months at a time, and ryegrass doesn't cope with that. It just wants to get nibbled every 3 weeks, and if that doesn't happen, it'll just go to seed and then it'll die out anyway, and then the rest of these plants will choke it out, which is good. As I started with, good for the plant for having a year out of ryegrass, and these crops will then smother out ryegrass seeds for future years. Yeah, go on, Nikki. Yeah, not just not just cover crops as for clover, but if you're wanting, like red clover, kind of needs to be in there at least a year to get much benefit out of it. But you can get short cover crops either through the summer or through the winter. The summer ones are really easy because you've got sunlight and heat, but it's obviously taken away from a time when you'd be wanting to grow your main crop. But you can still get things to work in. This picture here was one of the last years before we went organic, and it was just a case of putting every last bit of seed we had in our store into the seed drill and just seeing what worked. And it was kind of at the time when we're starting to go down this route. It was absolutely unbelievable what came, and it was just down to the biodiversity of plants that was in there. It just all suited each other. There was virtually no weeds at all. Each one was competing with each other, but also helping each other. It's amazing what a cereal will do to help other crops along, whether it's an undersown grass or even in forage crops. That was really cheap, but in general, cover crops are really cheap. They kind of need to be so that people can use them. Sometimes you're only getting 6 weeks out of them. Sometimes we are now trying to get a year out of them and get 2 or 3 grazings. They can fit in your rotation pretty easily. Obviously, depending on your climate, if we can get our cereal harvested by the 20th August, we can get cover crops back in around about the same time, and we know that we'll have a decent crop getting through the winter. But if we leave it even much more than a week after that, the amount of biomass that will be there will be quite reduced. But at the same time, on about the groundswell 5 points, it's still, there's going to be something there to keep living roots growing all year, keep your ground covered, and that is the biggest point. There's a lot of farms around us just now getting all their cereals ploughed up for the winter because it's quite good weather, but it's quite a good feeling knowing that ours are at least green and that they'll get grazed with something through the winter. Might not be for long, but even if it's a fortnight, it's a fortnight less cost than something else. Just the last point on that was income, additional income. If you can get, there's quite a lot of people do like bed and breakfast lambs, where you just get stock from somewhere else in to eat a cover crop. So the cover crop will done the benefit for the arable farm by doing its thing, putting roots down, keeping it green. You also get the income off the grazing, the the livestock farm will have put on, but you also got the dung out of those animals as well. So it can work, and it can just give you a break off of that on that field for a year, just a different part of your rotation. Adding in cattle into arable is it's fine on a mixed farm that's suited to it, but on just plain arable farms, it takes a bit of getting water infrastructure there. Electric fencing is pretty easy nowadays. You get solar energized, there's battery, you can, like, mains, if you can get it close enough. You can set up paddocks pretty easily without much worry. You get your cows trained to the fence and they're quite happy. The water can be a tricky one depending on where you are. Sometimes you can get it plumbed into a stream of gravity. You can get different pumps for lifting water out of streams, getting it a bit higher to then use gravity. Through this, like, we have our cows in 2 mobs. There's this one in the picture, which is 90 cows with our calves. And they, midsummer, can get through about 7,500 litres of water a day. So for us, having what we call an IBC, like a 1,000 litre trailer, is totally useless. We need a high volume. So we've got 44,000 litre storage tanks a bit higher up. And then this is a 1,100 litre concrete trough that moves with the cows every day. But it just means whenever those cows move into a new paddock and come back to they'll go and eat for 10 minutes and then come back for water, and we just know that there's always 1,000 litres to go at. Whereas if it was a smaller trough, they don't have the storage capacity, and then the first cow drinks all and you're just relying on the flow of water to get in there quick enough. And the tyre behind is just for pulling minerals about, whatever's deficient or that, and sometimes it's just a bit of salt to help to out of their inquisitiveness, really. This is probably the bit Nikki most wanted me to speak on. So when we plant our winter oats, like the first year, we'll plough out a permanent grass, and we'll do that sort of the 20th August, which quite often is, especially this year, was before we'd even done most of our harvest. We'll plough it out and we'll just put in winter oats. It's just ploughed and then like combination drilled. We won't use a roller. We don't, and obviously there's no sprays or anything with being organic. That gets off to an absolute flying start, far too fast for most conventional farms. But our intention is that come Christmas, early New Year, that our weaned calves will all be turned onto this after they finished their stockpile of grass. And you can get, it's 50 hectares of grain, but there's 36 hectares of winter oats. And this can get us about 2 or 3 weeks extra grazing. We don't put them very tight. We let them do it. It's quite high in nitrogen, just for being such a young plant. So sometimes they need a bit buffer down the outside of just either the edge of the grass or just a bale of hay. But it's basically, you graze it until, slightly beyond what you think is too much. Like, we try and, unless it's an absolute torrential rain, you want them on there as long as possible. Not to make a poach, but you want them to graze it as tight to the tight down as possible. And it just jumps back really quick. But as long as when it jumps back, you then leave it and you don't touch it again through. And for us, once those cattle are out of that field, that's the gate closed on that and right through till harvest. So it's, yeah, the tractor goes in, ploughs the field, drills the field. It can sometimes harrow if we think there's too many weeds, but if not, it's just closed right till harvest. So we'll do that for 2 years on that field. It works really well. But the biggest thing we've noticed is, well, we don't use fungicides anyway now, but we had the first years we've done it, we had a bit of a trial, seeing how much benefit it was. The biomass between the fields, you couldn't really tell the difference. You definitely wouldn't think there was any less. But when we went through with the combine, it was noticeable how much less disease there was on the field, part of the field that had been grazed. And it's mainly things like yellow rust. It can be quite bad in our area, and like they can make the combine brown when it all piling off the crops. But there was not a single bit of rust that we found on the cereals that had been grazed. And it just, yeah, there's a bit of dung goes in there as well, which can help, but it's not a great deal. They're just small animals. Most people would do it with sheep, but we don't have sheep. I don't want sheep. And these young cattle do it perfectly well. We also do it with our deer. They're a bit lighter on their feet, and they can basically do the same job as sheep, but we're not got all the fencing in for them yet. And it just works. Yeah, it does a good job. It keeps the animals out for an extra 2 or 3 weeks, and yeah, it works well. I think that yeah, weed control, it was kind of touched on it before. By getting our cereals in a bit quicker, they bulk up really quick. Because we're intended for the cattle to graze them in the winter, if we can get them in quick, they'll smother out any grass weeds that are there, perennial weeds, and annuals. The cattle then graze them. If there is weeds, the cattle graze them out, and the plant's off and running in the spring again. Just having cover crops or grass or whatever in your rotation that is used by the cows and not just harvested off. It can, those weeds that you think are just there all the time, not really getting hit back by chemicals. It's amazing what, like, I say it quite a lot, but don't fight nature. Or it'll cost you money. And if we can work along with nature, you can get by using cattle in your system, you won't get the weeds that are wanting to come there because of the system you've got. If you've got your system running along with nature, those weeds won't have the conditions to grow, so they won't appear. There's a part of nature will think you shouldn't have a monoculture crop, and so that's where a bit of diversity in your cereal comes. But the cattle and your herbalaise can be part of that solution as well. And it works as long as you don't go too long at it. So yeah, this is the last picture is just to say thank you. But this is a group of our cows and calves, and that's the type of stuff that some of them are on through the summer. That's just red clover, but we have got a lot of herbalaise. Everything that comes out of a cereal crop will go into herbalaise and does up to 8 years.
Brilliant. Thanks, Stuart. I think there's some questions, but I just wanted to ask about bloat, because that's obviously something that I'd mentioned. And with that huge amount of red clover, there is lots of farmers who get really concerned about that. So did you have any problems with managing bloat at all?
No, and I don't want to, we don't have it, and so I don't want to tell people not to worry about it. But I think you get a lot of bloat off of either animals that have never seen clover before. that just go and get a big belly full. Or like when we go into our clover, it's quite stemmy. So as much as it looks an awesome crop, there's a lot of stem, there's a lot of seed head, and it keeps their diet pretty good. Like that type of crop in that last picture doesn't fire through cattle that quick. You wouldn't really notice much of a difference in their dung, whereas if it's like really short stuff that you would high quality silage, basically, I could see you getting a lot of problems with that. But our cattle have been on clover, like they're on clover all year, so that they are pretty used to it.
Great, thank you. Ari, I don't know if we've got other questions.
Yes, I have again questions a lot. The one question I was having is if this system grazing on if there is like a different farmers, one is it's not question for Stuart, but maybe for you or all, how this system works in UK. If there is that the animal farmer brings their animals to the grain farmer, how is the cost shared? Who will pay the fencing cost? Is this like perimeter fences for the land or the grain farmer, and the seed cost is also from the grain farmer, or how this or it's every time different, depends on the farms? Or
yeah, it definitely varies. There are some really nice examples of long-term relationships where you've got particularly sheep farmers and then arable farmers who will have a lot ongoing relationships where every year they'll bring the same animals, and it's just about trust and having that relationship. And so quite often in those systems there is limited financial transaction. So it will be fencing that's kind of either temporary or semi-permanent fencing that maybe the sheep owner would put in alongside a load of other temporary fencing to create subdivisions, and they would bring their sheep, graze them, not have to pay for the grazing because they've put the infrastructure in and they've put water in and they've put fencing in, but the arable farm knows that it's going to get those additional benefits. There are other systems where, as Stuart explained, if it's a cover crop or if it's during rather than the actual cereal that's getting grazed and it's the lay, then normally it would be done on a headage payment. So there's a payment per head of animal that's there from the animal owner back to the arable farm. But it really varies. And actually, we're just putting in a bid to do some research on this so that we can understand who's doing this, what are the different methods that are being used, what are the benefits that are being identified, and how are those being valued? Because there's a benefit to the livestock owner, but there's also inevitably a benefit to the arable farm. And so I think trying to make sure that those values are appropriately remunerated so that there's an accurate cost associated with them is really important. Stuart, I don't know if you've got more to say on that.
Yeah, I'm in a project that's doing cover crops just now as well, with a bunch of French farmers, and it would work out. The arable farm would charge so much per week per animal, but it's in their benefit, it's in their interest to get as much crop there for those animals to eat, which is better for their land, but it also, for payment wise, it's the longer those animals have something to eat, the longer they'll get paid for. But it's with the trials we're doing, not on this farm, but in the area, the struggle is getting the arable farmer to prioritise putting those cover crops in, because at that time they're either busy with harvest or busy trying to get the rest of their cereals in. And if the later you go, the less crop there is there, and if the later you go, if there's less crop, there's less interest from a stock farmer to put those animals on. But it's, well, at least when we done it 3 years ago, it was about 60 pence per lamb per week, and that was so if you get those animals on, it can do well for an arable farm.
Okay. And what was your, Stuart, favorite cover crops if you are or mixture what you have grazed?
For through the summer, the herbal lay is, it takes a lot of beating that. But for trying to get a cover crop through the summer, through the winter, I mean, it's still work in progress, but we've tried stubble turnips, forage rape, phacelia, annual clovers, spring beans, and a cereal in there as well. So it's like for us, it's a bit of whatever's left in the shed, and a bit of something else. You just stick it in and go, because our main thing is to get a green field for the winter. And we know that crops like forage rape and things can take a lot of nitrogen, so that it seems a bit pointless putting too much of that in if you're going to then have to put more fertilizer on it to get it to grow. So that's why we went kind of down the beans and annual clovers. Depends when you get in, but we're trying to get it around a 12-month cover crop, which basically so we can get 3 winter oats in our system and do away with the barley. And if we can put we put westerwolds in there as well, which I know I said not to use the ryegrass, but it'll grow really quick. And if we can basically graze it as a field of grass in the summer 2 or 3 times, and it'll have a grazing through the winter, we can then get it ploughed back in without it seeding too much. And it keeps the field green, growing all the time.
But you mentioned that you are growing this winter oat.
Yeah.
But do you know that there is also winter wheat and winter rye grazing systems? Yeah. But
yeah, they just work just as. We do winter oats because it suits what the soil we have here. It is a bit better for doing the grazing, basically because it'll tailor really quickly and it'll cover the ground and gives you a lot of biomass at this time of year. But that's whereas a winter wheat will really just put up 2 or 3 leaves in the winter, and then you've not got an awful lot to graze, and there's not a lot of roots there through the winter either. So it can work, but not. You'd maybe need it to get on and get growing a bit quicker even.
Okay. Then there was about question. There is I don't know if it was in the presentation, but about this straw and manure exchange. If there is again grain farmer and animal farmer, how is this common in UK? At how it's if the animal farmer needs straw and does it have some common change system? How much straw you get to give manure back?
So historically, it's just been the livestock farmers bought the straw off the arable farmer, and there's never really been anything went back the way to the arable farm apart from money. But things are changing, people's attitudes to fertility are changing, so it's basically there's a lot of muck for straw deals is what it's called, and it's as long as it's kept separate, so that they know that the straw goes off the farm to the livestock, it goes off the arable farm to the livestock farm, and as long as it's not just mixed in with everybody else's straw, that will then go into the shed as muck, and then that muck is carted back to the arable farm as manure. And the deal, I don't quite agree with it, but the way that most of them are around here is the livestock farmer will bale the straw, he'll cart the straw home, put it in his shed, bed it to the cows, and then muck those sheds back out all the way back to the arable farm. And then the arable farmer will then spread it on his field. That's what it is just now, because it's quite there's more life for muck, but that'll change. There's a bit of livestock farmers are wanting to get a bit extra because of the feed that they put into their animals. Is then, if that's been like silage, it then goes through the cattle, and then it's going back to the arable farm rather than sort of for free. But the price of straw just now is ridiculously high, so the arable farmer's wanting as much return off of that muck as he can get.
Okay, then I have one question more about is there like how long, or no, if we take this winter oats, when you know it's the right time to graze, you count some leaf stages, or just
I think it's before. Can't remember what growth stage number it is, but it's just before stem extension. So you can graze if you don't graze at Christmas when we would normally do it because it's too wet or whatever. You can keep grazing until like mid-March in our climate before it's wanting to extend. And as soon as it extends, if you graze it, then it'll be stunted the rest of the year. But if you can get it before that, you'll be perfectly fine.
Okay, thank you. And another question about I do understand, or to understand correctly, that there's a different subsidy system, or in Scotland and in UK about this. Yeah. So you can have this herbal lay. Do I understand correctly that 8 years, and then you go back to the grain rotation?
Yeah.
So
there's nothing. We don't get any subsidy in Scotland for doing that. That's a completely English thing. So, we are kind of sort of buying expensive herbal lay seed because it's getting subsidised in England. But at the same time, we know that it works really well for us. So there's just some things you have to do.
But you don't have this permanent grassland. No, how we in EU we have a problem that if there is a permanent grassland, then it has to stay to the permanent grassland. Then you can't. If you have more than 5 years herbal lay, it goes to the permanent grassland, and then you never can use it in a crop system again. This is really messed up our things, really, because it has caused more problems to environment than other subsidy systems at all. So you don't have this, so you can have the longer grass period. So that's really good. And yes, but I don't see any more questions here. But I remember you in the Groundswell, I think in the first year when I was there, was it you who was building yourself these bale unrollers?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
It's taken an absolute mad rush in the last 2 weeks. Don't really know why, but it's a bit busy in the workshop just now.
Do you export to Europe, Stuart?
Yes, we should buy some.
Container load.
Yeah, fill it up. We've not done yet. As far as across waters went, I've got one on the Isle of Man, but it's not quite Europe. But yeah, anything's possible, really. So.
Yeah, no, but okay, but really, thank you a lot. And I have to say that at least one of these farms you in your bale grazing system was in Estonia. No, previous farm manager was in Estonia, and we visited also our pastures and
yeah, Silas.
Silas,
Yeah, Russ. Yeah, nice.
Silas
Okay.
and Russ was here, and in the end of this trip, they are getting quite quiet, and they were saying that they really need to bring UK farmers to Estonia, or Pasture for Life farmers to Estonia to see the biodiversity of our natural grasslands. So, and I think they already set some kind of plan that in August or somewhere, and then we'll bring. So maybe we will meet some of you, but definitely we will. Estonians come to Groundswell this year in 25. So we will.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah,
that's great news. And yeah, Silas and Russ did say that they were really blown away by the natural grasslands that you have, and they said that they just felt totally in awe of that. And Russ has spent quite a lot of time in Romania, and he said, oh, they were even better than the Romanian grasslands. He was saying they were really, really good. So yeah, I think they're keen to set up a study tour. So hopefully we'll be able to come and meet you in person. But if you're at Groundswell, do come and see us, and we'd love to host you on the Pasture for Life stand, and yeah, come and join us for a drink. So stay in touch, and thank you so much for inviting us to come and speak this afternoon. It's been great fun.
Thank you, really.
All right. Take care.
Bye.